This game is about timing and planning jumps. The colored wheel, music, and the colored tinges at the corners of the screen help the player time and plan their jumps. The tinges tells the player which color block is currently solid, but is meant to be subtle and not too much in your face. A bit like ambient backlight on modern TV screens. The reason why the color wheel takes up so much space on the screen is to tell the player that it is important and useful for planning the jumps. The music has been chosen such that the beat per minute matches the pace at which the blocks switch on and off, and helps the player with the timing. It enables the player to get a feel for the timing without having to rely only on the visual cues, but it will not tell the player which color will be the next to turn solid, only when. So all in all, the player gets 3 main cues about timing other than the blocks themselves: the color wheel, the colored tinges, and the rhythm of the music. The game was designed with the idea of being easy to pick up but difficult to master. The first colored blocks in the first level are made to form a wall that turns solid when the wheel is in the green color. The player is only able to get through them once the wheel no longer is in the green. This shows the player that the solidity is connected to the color wheel. After that, the player has to use this knowledge to time their jump to get onto a green block hanging in the air in order to reach the goal. The goal looks like a door, and its imagery was chosen to connect the possible previous game experience the player has had. It is not uncommon for games to use doors as a way of letting the player get to the next area or level of the game. The controls WSD plus spacebar were also chosen to remind the player of previous games, so that they could be as intuitive as possible. Whenever the player jumps, lands, dies, or completes a level, sound effects are played to give feedback. As the player progresses through the levels, the game gets more and more complex and less straightforward. More colors are added, and the time the blocks stay solid changes. The routes to the goal require more and more skill from the player. Some maps have multiple possible routes to the goal in order to be somewhat forgiving to the player when they make mistakes, and still have the game feel enjoyable, so the player doesn't feel too punished. Initially, the bottom area is completely solid at all times. In later levels, the bottom area is only partially solid, and the player then has the possibility of losing and restarting the level if they fall through to their death. When it comes to the development aspect of the cues, one big part was making sure that the color wheel could be generated and adjusted completely through changing parameters, instead of having to draw and manually change each wheel for each level. I wanted it to be as flexible as possible. This would make it easier to add new levels with different wheels during development. Although adding this flexibility would initially take longer time than just manually drawing a static image for the wheel, it would save a lot of time later as more and more levels with different wheels were added. So it was worth putting in the extra time to add this functionality. Additionally, this would make the wheels take up less memory space than having different image files for each wheel, especially when more and more levels are added. It was surprisingly unstraightforward to implement how the wheel was split into different colors. Conceptually, it is similar to a pie chart, and seeing how pie charts are quite a well-known and basic concept, I was shocked to find that there was almost no way to implement a pie chart material in Unreal Engine, at least not any established ways. There were some plugins and assets for making pie charts, but they were hidden behind paywalls and I couldn't find a guide on how to do it, no tutorial or anything. Instead, I had to look at how to create circular menus and try to implement the wheel based on that. But even then, adding multiple colors instead of just 2 proved difficult, especially adding an arbitrary number of colors instead of a specified number. Eventually, I had to compromise and tell the color wheel it could take up to 12 colors, but to let the number of them to actually use remain arbitrary. If you press Escape, you reach the pause menu. Currently, you can only unpause or quit the game, or adjust the in-game volume. The plan was to add a time-based high score and a save/load game functionality, but there wasn't enough time to do it. Since the blocks, color wheel, and player controls constitute the basic functionality in the game, adding more levels became relatively easy once those were done. The only thing the developer then has to focus on is the design of the levels themselves and finding music with a suitable beat per minute mark.